everybody. Hello. Welcome back to another Crime SMR video. Today we have a case with a lot of twists and turns. This might be a longer one. There was a lot that I wanted to make sure to touch on in this video. So I'm just gonna start by putting up a picture of a woman by the name of Liz Sullivan. And Elizabeth was a vibrant young adult living in Norfolk, Virginia. And it was in Norfolk, Virginia that Elizabeth ended up meeting a young man named Matt. And he was actually stationed at the Norfolk, I never know how to say that, Norfolk Naval Station. And he was actually from Minnesota, but he joined the Navy. And I'm gonna put up a picture of Matt as well. So we have Elizabeth and Matt up on the screen right now. And it was a very fast jump in relationship with these two. Basically from the moment that they met, Elizabeth was head over heels. It could be said the same about Matt, and basically the two just became like enamored with each other. And not only did they feel this passion towards each other, but they found a sense of stability with each other. So it was very comforting, especially for Elizabeth. And after a few months, maybe two, they basically started dating and spending every spare second together. But unfortunately, Matt ended up getting a call that he was going to be moved across the country to San Diego to a new station. And remember, they're in Virginia. So this is not very good news for this couple. They've known each other for a couple months. They don't really want to step on each other's toes too much about, him having to move across the country. But ultimately they have a good conversation about this, and they decide that they were going to get married so they could stay together, basically. Even though they had only been together for a couple months, Elizabeth was a very positive person, and she knew that this was the one, and she loved Matt, and she knew Matt loved her, so they were going to jump in and do this. So the couple ended up getting married. It was around the same time that Matt and Liz were preparing for the move to San Diego that Liz finds out that she was pregnant. So they find out that she's pregnant, and then they move to San Diego, basically. And it wasn't necessarily great news for the couple, but it wasn't bad news that they were expecting. But it basically, again, just forced this couple to grow up and now be parents, not just a passionate couple that just met a couple months ago. Now they were expecting a child together. They make their move to San Diego, and they try to settle in before they could even remotely put their roots down in their new home. Matt gets another call, and he ends up getting deployed overseas. So this leaves Liz alone in a brand new state across the country with a pregnant belly, expecting. So Liz, being the superhuman that she is, she completed her pregnancy all alone in this brand new state and gave birth to a baby girl. And Matt was able to visit, but he was never able to stay very long. And not long following the birth of their baby girl, Liz found out that she was pregnant again. And now they were expecting a second child with Matt still not even in the same country. So she did the same thing as the first. She went through the entire pregnancy basically alone and had another healthy baby girl. So Matt was able to visit again when he could, but never really could stay too long. At this point, Liz didn't really have a career. She didn't really have many hobbies. She had no friends other than the friends that were back home. And her husband, the love of her life, she has barely even spent any time with. At this point, she's been together with Matt, and she's spent more time with him separated from her than actually in the same state together, because she's gone through 2 pregnancies now with him not by her side. This kind of led to some feelings of like an identity crisis. She was mom. She wasn't Elizabeth or Liz. She went by Liz. She wasn't Liz. She was mom. And she was a wife, a military wife. And that was her identity. And that really bothered her. Beyond this, she was lonely. She missed Matt. She missed having friends and family nearby. So kind of feeling the crushing weight of all this, Liz decided to not wallow in it. She decided to do something about it. Her first method to kind of curing these blues was to find some friends, and that is exactly what she did. She ended up meeting a man named Nathan, and he became one of her closest confidants. The friendship quickly blossomed into like a best friendship. They told each other everything, and because of this friendship, she started to feel better. She started to feel like herself again, and not just a military wife or mom. So Matt ended up coming home from deployment, and the little family moved yet again to like some Navy housing. And Liz thought, okay, this is finally our time. My husband is finally home, and what else could go wrong? He just came back from deployment. Like, he's got to be here to stay. So now that Matt was finally home, she could have even more autonomy, even more of an identity beyond being just mom. That's how Liz expected things to go, but that is not how they went. And like, remember, these Matt and Liz kind of jumped into things, and they really didn't know each other too well, and they hadn't spent a ton of time together. But it was Nathan, Liz's best friend in the area, that she ended up confiding in when she realized that things weren't going as they should be, or that she wants them to be or expects them to be. It's clear that her and Matt are like just kind of feeling they just aren't meshing well. He was gone for this period of time, and now he's back, and Liz even says that he feels like a stranger in the home, and that he's not really putting in much effort to get to know Liz and their baby girls. And Liz at this point hadn't really brought it up to Matt, but she was confiding in Nathan about these things. So at this point, Liz is 32 years old, and she's still feeling hopeful about their situation because, one, she's just a positive, upbeat person, but two, she hadn't mentioned anything to Matt yet. So there was hope that if she brings this up to Matt, that he's going to be open to the idea of changing things, working through these issues that Liz seems to have in their marriage, and possibly hearing if Matt has any issues that he would like to discuss. She picks a night, and she decides to bring all of this up to Matt. And much to her dismay, Matt shut her down immediately. He did not want to have this conversation. He was fine how things were. He was fine going to work and not really getting to know them, and just didn't want to put the effort in, or he simply just didn't care. So this was really crushing to Liz, and she of course went to talk to Nathan about all of this, and it was very, very hurtful for him to shut down that conversation in that way. In this same conversation, Matt also drops a bomb on Liz. He was moving his parents into their home with them, with their children. And he had already told the parents they could move in. This wasn't a discussion. This wasn't a conversation that they were having. He was telling Liz, hey, they're coming, and they're coming soon. So that upset Liz a lot. Not necessarily the fact that they were coming, but the fact that Matt was just going to move them in and told her like a couple days before. So this was a very upsetting evening for Liz, because not only did he downplay her feelings, he also dropped that bomb on her as well. So after this conversation with Matt, Liz is now equipped with the knowledge that Matt doesn't want to change, he's not going to change, and that he's clearly okay with making decisions about their lives by himself. So the once Liz felt like she was losing her light, and it was very clear that Matt was the one who was dimming it. And Liz actually goes as far as contacting a divorce lawyer. And initially, this was kind of just to like test the waters and see, if things really go bad, I need to know my options. I need to have a plan for me and the girls. So she keeps Nathan in the loop for all of this, and she ends up actually going over to Nathan's. I'm not sure if this is the same night that her and Matt got into an argument. I don't believe so. I think it's like a couple nights later. But regardless, she goes over to Nathan's because she just needs to escape. She needs to just get away for a little bit. So she goes over to Nathan's and they talk, and it's clear that she's really upset and that things aren't going her way in life. Nathan ends up saying that Liz decided right like then and there that was it. She was gonna go through with a divorce. She was gonna leave Matt and she was gonna find her light. She was gonna get her spark back. So Liz ended up actually spending the night at Nathan's that evening, and when she woke up the next morning, she said goodbye to Nathan and she went back to her responsibilities, her children, her husband, her impending divorce, and the in-laws that were coming. So she had to go and deal with all of this. So Nathan actually calls Liz at some point this morning. This is actually October 13th, 2014 in the morning. So Nathan calls Liz and Liz does answer, and she tells Nathan in kind of like a hushed voice, like, and this was very rushed, like, hey, I'm gonna call you back, like, I can't talk right now. So he's like, okay, and hangs up. So this is Monday, October 13th, 2014, it comes and goes without another word from Liz. So Nathan's like, okay, this is a little strange. She calls, she doesn't pick up. So now we're on to Tuesday, the 14th, and Nathan calls again. She doesn't pick up. So he's definitely worried because these two really don't go more than like maybe 2 days without talking to each other. And when Liz says she's gonna call, she calls, and it's very strange. So Nathan ends up calling Matt, and that's not really like a strange thing. They're kind of family friends. Matt knows Nathan as well, but Matt says he hasn't seen Liz since Monday either, and this is a red flag, obviously, to Nathan. Well, if her husband hasn't seen her, I haven't seen her, like, she only knows her kids and that's it, and the kids are with Matt, so where is Liz? So Nathan prompts Matt further, and Matt explains that his family was to move in the next day, so I guess that's on the Tuesday the 14th, and he just assumed that Liz was really upset by this and just wanted some space and wanted to let them come in and get settled, and then she would come in and go on with life. So essentially, Matt says it's not strange that he hasn't seen her since Monday and that he expects to see her in the next few days. So I'm gonna put up a picture of Nathan and Liz right now so you can get a look at Nathan. After talking with Matt, Nathan decides to call the police and report Liz missing. The police really don't do much. They basically tell him, if she's missing for a couple more days, we will go ahead and check it out. So a few more days, or a small amount of time passes, still with no word from Liz. So police end up intervening. What they do is go to Liz's house and kind of check some things out. They notice that Liz's car is still in the garage, which is obviously strange. If she were to have gone somewhere, she would have her car, first of all. So that was definitely strange. And people close to Liz also tell police that Liz would not leave her kids. And there's just like surmounting evidence that makes it seem like her disappearance is incredibly strange, but still unexplainable. So the house ends up getting searched. I don't think it was like a super in-depth search, but it was searched. And the following kind of like weird evidence or pieces of information were gleaned from this house search. One, Liz's suitcase, phone, all missing. It's made obvious that Liz and Matt had separate bedrooms, like they were not sleeping together, so marital issues. Matt tells police that money from a joint account of theirs was transferred to one of Liz's personal accounts. And that's pretty much all they found. Matt also gave the police some journals for them to review, and they also checked on like bank statements, and they noticed that there were like transactions on Liz's credit card. So this information gave Liz's friends and family a little bit of hope, I guess, that okay, Liz is out there using her credit card, so maybe she is taking some space. There's a lot that's going on right now in her life. There are a few individuals who actually spot Liz, or like they say they had spotted her, and one even said they had spotted her at an airport, but really these leads didn't lead up to anything. And the police begin to really dig into the life of Liz and Matt, starting with, who is Liz? Does she have any secrets? So they quickly learn that Liz had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And this disorder is defined as a personality disorder characterized by severe mood swings, impulsive behavior, and difficulty forming stable relationships. So when prompted about this, friends and family say that you could tell that she had this disorder based off of some of her impulsivities, mood swings, and upsetting thought patterns, but she really seemed to battle the disorder pretty well, especially from the outside looking in. And as you'd expect, police wanted to dig into the marriage of Liz and Matt, so they even discovered a 911 call from the same day that Liz went missing. This call actually came from Matt. Matt explains to the 911 operator that he's worried his wife is going to take his kids in a potential custody battle. He explains he thinks that Liz is trying to ruin his life. I don't really know how this call ends, but he makes another 911 call about an hour later. He goes on about the same kind of things. My wife is trying to ruin my life, blah blah blah, explaining Liz has moved money over, and it kind of seems like more complaining, and it's clearly not like an emergency. So the operator basically says, well, we can't really do anything about this, so, and then that's it. Pursuing all avenues, police end up learning that Liz had downloaded some dating apps in the months leading up to her disappearance, and this was clearly a major lead in this investigation, because really all they had going for them was, okay, she either went off somewhere by herself or Matt did something. So now we know she had dating apps and was potentially meeting strangers, and it's just adding another layer. So after more digging, they find an individual by the name of Steven, and it became apparent that these two had some sort of relationship. And when Nathan was prompted about this, he did say, yes, I know who Steven is, I know about this relationship. And Liz considered Steven her boyfriend, basically, so she was having an affair with somebody named Steven, and they decided to talk to Steven, and he was incredibly uncooperative. So they basically are like having to now investigate and figure out who Steven is without Steven himself, and also the police are trying to figure out where the heck do they need to like put all their resources, their money, their time, their officers, because they have so many angles right now. Did this Steve person do something terrible to Liz? Did Matt do something terrible to Liz? Did Liz go and start a new life somewhere by herself? Did she go start a new life with Steve? Did some horrible random act of opportunity just happen to Liz? Is she hurt somewhere? Is she deceased somewhere? There's so many angles, so police are trying to work off what is the most likely, where is the evidence pointing, and again, there's not much evidence. So back to the Steve angle, they learned that Steve lived with a roommate, and this roommate had a girlfriend who did not particularly like Liz. And the story that goes along with this is that the woman, this girlfriend, happened to see car seats in the back of Liz's car. And she made the assumption that Liz had kids that were at her home alone, and she called CPS on Liz. So CPS follows up this call, and they complete an investigation and blah blah blah. They ultimately find nothing wrong, but they informed Liz that they would have to give Matt a call and let him know about their investigation. So this obviously is about to blow up in Liz's face. How does she explain this to Matt? So she actually goes and tells Matt everything. She tells him about the affair with Steven, and Matt tells police he didn't really care, but they ended up finding some texts that he was basically harassing Steven a little bit. So it was clear that to some extent he did care, and he was upset by this, even though he told police he didn't care. Because of everything going on in Liz's life, she actually had started self-harming like right before she went missing, and she was having kind of intrusive thoughts. She had a ton on her plate, and really she only had Nathan to confide in, because I mean, she's not going to talk to her kids about this, and her husband is not there for her. To throw in another loop into all of this, Steven got an email from a strange email address claiming to be Liz, and to check if this was Liz, because Liz was missing, Steven goes, I'm gonna ask you a question that only Liz would know. What did you get me for my birthday? And the person on the other line says a keychain, and that was correct. So Steven was like, okay, it's Liz. And so he ended up deleting this email. I don't know, getting rid of this email, because he wasn't able to give it to police. So I find that a little bit suspicious. Like, why are you getting rid of that email? But okay. It comes out somewhere later on in the investigation that Matt was potentially physically abusive towards Liz, and that Liz had been seeking out a restraining order against him. So it's like all of this stuff is just coming out. And when this information becomes public, Matt kind of like freaks out. He cuts off the cell phone payment for Liz's line, and this is like so random because the phone is missing, and if you talk to Matt, it's because Liz ran off somewhere, has the phone, the computer, the suitcase. So why would he cut off her phone if that's his story, that she had run off? So he actually also moves in a woman to their home, and his Facebook status changes to in a relationship, and this is just 3 months after Liz went missing. So this puts a lot of eyes on him as well, even though there were already a lot. So they end up learning that Matt had purchased carpet cleaner the same day Liz had gone missing. So this is obviously peculiar, but it's not really super damning. So after monitoring him over time, he purchases more carpet cleaner. Nothing beyond this carpet cleaner bit of information nothing substantial beyond this happens for 2 years. 2 years. In October of 2016, when after Matt has seemingly entirely moved on from his life, something incredibly shocking turns up. So this case has been cold for 2 years. Someone was walking around with their dog, walking near the San Diego Bay. They discover a human body, deceased, laying on the shore, a half a mile from where Liz and Matt's home were together. Liz's body had been found. While this gave Liz's friends and family a little bit of closure as to where the heck Liz was for 2 years, it really didn't explain what happened to her. And quickly, the closure about where Liz was also taken from them when the medical examiner confirmed that Liz's time of death was not 2 years ago. It was not 2014. It was 1 to 2 months before her body had been found. It was also determined that she suffered stab wounds that were bone deep. So this was incredibly incredibly shocking news to everyone in the family and the police department. They were looking for a runaway Liz who'd been somewhere for 2 years, or they were looking for a dead body, but they found Liz deceased, but had only been deceased for a couple of months. So where was Liz this past 2 years? Where was she? So this is a question that police have to try to answer. Literally the same day that Liz's body was found, Matt starts packing up and moving across the country to Maryland. So that's also suspicious. Matt's very suspicious, if you can't tell. They ended up, because he left the house, the police ended up going in and using luminol to search for blood, and police found a substantial amount of blood in the bathroom and like out onto the living room carpet, and DNA matched with Liz. It was Liz's blood. So even with this evidence, there was really no explaining where Liz had been. They just know that, okay, there's blood here, there's a lot of blood, maybe enough blood to cause death, but I don't know. It's really hard to tell. An entire year goes by yet again with no closure to both questions. Where had Liz been? What had happened to Liz? Police decide to do a super extensive search of this home that Liz and Matt shared, which good thing they did, because they ended up finding a military knife with Liz's blood on the blade and Matt's DNA on the handle. And this was hidden. It was clearly stowed away, so it was a hidden, what maybe a murder weapon. So the police felt they finally had enough to charge Matt with Liz's murder. So Matt ends up being arrested and he goes to trial. All of her friends and family come together to give their testimony about Liz, about Matt. Another 911 call ends up being found of Liz reporting domestic violence, and lots of testimony about Matt's abusive character just begins stacking up on him. There's not much hard evidence, though. It's a lot about his character. So in the midst of the trial, the prosecution was tasked with explaining where the heck Liz was for the past 2 years, and basically their argument hinges on the fact that no, she wasn't just somewhere the past 2 years. Liz, in fact, she was murdered in 2014, the same morning that Nathan reported her missing. So, what is the medical examiner wrong? What are you trying to say? Is all the questions for the prosecution. So, the prosecution explains that Matt had flipped out on Liz when Liz brought up a divorce, potentially taking the kids, and he stabbed her multiple times and basically stowed Liz up in the attic. So when the initial searches for information about Liz's disappearance, police didn't see or find anything. But Matt moved Liz to the large freezer in his garage to store her body for 2 years when he decided it was time to move to Maryland and had to get rid of her body. And that is what the prosecution says. And they bring forward multiple expert witnesses to talk about whether this was, if this is plausible, if her body can look like it had been killed 1 to 2 months ago, yet she was murdered 2 years ago but kept in a freezer. All of these experts say yes, absolutely, that would slow decomposition 100%. So jury goes to deliberate. They come back very quickly with a guilty verdict, and Matt was found guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison. And because the jury didn't believe this murder was planned, Matt was not convicted of first-degree murder. I disagree with that, because it's not like he killed her out of a blind rage and then called it in. He hid it for 2 years. He not only did he hide the fact that he killed her, he hid her. So I don't know, at least there was some justice served there, but I just want to talk about the gravity of this situation. This guy, Matt, stabbed his wife to death out of anger, put her up somewhere else for like a month or two, and then put her in a freezer for 2 years, where he moved in a new woman, had another kid with her, and raised that kid along with his other 2 girls, and also had his parents in the house. That's so disturbing. Like, how can you even do that for 2 years? And then also to think that Liz potentially wouldn't have been found if he didn't move to Maryland, because he had to get rid of her from the freezer. So I don't know. Matt maintains his innocence still, so I kind of want to know what you guys think. I think there's too many coincidences. Like, he has motive, he had opportunity, and he had everything. So Liz was full of life. She wanted to be able to cherish her baby girls. She wanted to be able to cherish herself, how she felt she deserved to be cherished, and she was quite literally on the path to try to make her life what she wanted it to be when it was stolen from her. So let's all remember her today, and that is all the information I have. I know that was a lot, there were a lot of twists and turns, but I'm glad that police were able to seek and find justice for Liz. So thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you